for everybody else to have some success and get straight to that value. So next up, we're going to have a panel discussion. So we're going to talk about scaling observability, and so what better way to talk about scaling than to invite two people from two of Australia's arguably most successful technology companies we have. So from being Canva and Atlassian. So with that, I'd like to invite up onto the stage Jenna Nelson from Canva. And Andrew Rainwood from Atlassian to come and talk to us about scaling observability. Welcome, guys. So we'll just wait for some chairs to come down so we can sit down. But I guess while we're waiting for that, how about we just start with some introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and your roles.
Why don't I kick off? Hi, I'm Jenna Nelson. I'm currently the Director of Reliability Platforms at Canva. And before that, I've been in that role for about a year now, although I started as a principal engineer. And before that, I was at Google for about 14 years, where I started off as an individual contributor and then worked my way up through the tech lead, TLM, managers. What was the second part of that question? That was...
I guess, not only your role, but also, what's your team's mission
that
you have?
That's right. The mission we have is to not only build reliability tools to drive the product, but also drive cultural change throughout the organisation. So, I think the two big aspects of reliability is, part of it's about building the hygiene factors that you need, the tooling and rolling the tooling out, but actually driving cultural change as well. Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Brandwood. I've been with Atlassian for a little over 10 years now. But I've only been in the observability leadership position since October. I was working with half the team for about a year before that, but reorgs being what they are, we move around and shuffle often due to the scaling nature of our business. And so, working with these guys since October, they've come and paid to watch me speak. Hi, guys. If you're looking for any info from the Atlassians, they're all here. Really proud of these guys. It's been wonderful working with them and getting to know the observability space from the side of leading observability versus causing them trouble, which was where I was before. The past 9 years is basically dumping a whole heap of logs and metrics on them and wondering why they can't deal with it. And so, our mission is sort of shifting at the moment. It's been through a few different hands over the last few years, and I guess the whole of Atlassian is sort of shifting from, Scott used to say we're after the Fortune 500,000, and now we're after the Fortune 500, so we're going enterprise grade, and it's really a big shift in how we approach reliability in general. So we run the observability platforms for Atlassian Cloud, but that also involves how teams use it, how they achieve enterprise-grade reliability.
That's great. So I guess the first question I'll start off with, second question now, is really how do you define observability, right? So how's it perceived within your organisation, both by your engineering teams as well as by your leadership?
Great question. I think we've got a lot of different personas that use and involved with the observability space, so everything from the on-call engineer to support engineers, up to exec level leadership, incident commanders, the finance team. There's lots of different perceptions at play, so it's kind of hard to just say one thing, but I think in general, everyone knows it's vital. It's a vital part of the business, but it's also a very difficult part of the business to run and provide the right features at the right cost, at the right scale when you're a fast scaling business.
Yeah, I think Anthony's probably covered most of it. I think of it in the same way. Basically, there's two big roles that observability play. Part of it is around successfully knowing you've rolled out a service and debugging features. It's actually, the technical bit of you've rolled a service out, making sure it works. But then the second part of it is more around product management, senior leadership. So product management actually want to know the features being used, how it's being used, and the senior leadership want to understand, I use the term right-sizing a lot, which is basically how do you right-size your reliability efforts? How do you make sure you're actually applying your effort in the right way? And the only way you can look at that is to understand where the errors are coming from, how the features are being used. It's all that sort of loading around cost. And I'll probably talk about that in one of the other questions.
Yeah, that's great. I think this is a common trend with observability. I think everyone understands the value, right? And it's how about how do we drive that, I guess, that change in the organisation. And so with that, in speaking about change and and what the outcomes and the objectives of observability, above just the traditional mean time to resolution, what other kind of key metrics are you looking at to, I guess, measure and focus your teams towards?
Yeah, so I guess there's two ones that I'm very interested in at the moment. I think our organisations sit at different points in their maturity curve, and some organisations are still going to be very focused on the meat and potatoes of making sure you've got over the latencies measured of key user flows and error rates and all that sort of stuff. We're a long way down the journey now, and a big part of what we're trying to do is get really reliable top-level metrics that we can drive SLOs with, and particularly things like enterprise SLAs. So we have a bunch of metrics that we're driving through tracing data, and it's to do with the success and failures of user flows. And that's the first part, is having that really top-level metric that is genuinely about the customer experience. We really want to understand whether the customer is actually being affected or not. At scale, that's a really big problem. We have a 200 million MAU, and at scale, that's an interesting challenge because there's so many different experiences that users can have. So what does it even mean to have a top-line metric? But the other part I'm really excited about is we've been driving a project called the cost of unreliability, where we want to actually put a cost against outages. And we're about 6 months away of having a consistent data pipeline that gives us an actual first-order cost of an outage. And that's based on survivor analysis. So basically, when there's an outage, we look at the differential between between the group of people who are affected and a control group who have similar sets of properties, and then we look at the survivor analysis over a period of about 30 days, and the drop-off tells us how many people were affected by the outage and left the product, and it's not zero. And so we know when outages are causing problems, and then I twisted finance's arms to give me a number, and so we multiply by a magic number, and that gives us a cost associated with the outage, which I'm really excited about. Even at Google, we never had a figure that was so directly tied to an outage, and it's only first order. It doesn't take in reputational damage and a whole bunch of other things, but that's a pretty good first cut. And the nice thing about that is that it begins to be a number that we can talk to product management and senior leadership about, and it's very easily translatable into their prioritization. And this is where I get back to right sizing. How do we talk about feature versus reliability work?
It's a great use case. When it comes to talking leadership, money talks, right? So,
I mean, at some point, all metrics you need to be able to be talking apples with apples, right? And dollars is just where you always end up gravitating towards. It's an easy number to talk about.
Yes, I guess MTTR obviously is super important, but when we've focused on that specifically, we've found it's very hard for us to move the needle on that if teams aren't engaged. So another one that we've had direct focus on, and then just in the background, and I think we're coming back to a point where it's probably going to be a closer focus again, is customer detected incidents. So how often do people run into stuff and we find out from them it's really bad? The answer is all the time. We find out regularly, and it's really not okay. So from the platform's point of view, what can we do to make it easier to instrument the right things, to get telemetry on the right things, to highlight the right things? Things like the asserts piece, we're showing you correlating alerts, is something that we've been looking into as well. And then I guess the other metric, cost as a proportion of our cloud spend. Our observability costs are really quite high at the moment. We find most teams that we serve don't really understand the implications of the changes they make. So they'll roll out changes to logging and DPM and metrics time series that just blow us away. Either push us over the edge in terms of what we can scale to, or completely destroy our license. And that's a thing that we keep a pretty tight eye on.
Yeah, I mean, team breakdown of cost is really important. Like, you want to be able to drive all your costs back to a team level,
Yeah.
because it turns out that basically there's some big teams that cost money and everyone else you don't care about.
Yeah, so we've got some cost attribution, but getting a little more granular on how much we're attributing back, and then there's like always the threat of like how can we, you know, with some of these teams that just don't want to play ball, should we go to chargeback? Should we find some other way to help them?
I will say it's interesting. One of the drivers I have is to stop people from worrying about cost, because it's very easy for small teams to get obsessed about like, oh my god, I need to optimize this. I've got 5 servers, and what if we have to add a 6th? I'm like, add the 6th. It's not worth your time.
Yeah.
And driving that is also a really important little cultural idea.
Yeah, and so our next 3 years, we really want to get away from being the cost control team and back to being the reliability team. But that's a journey, and to get there, we're going to have to lean into cost first. But yeah, getting the top line items and not worrying too much about the bottom. I think you've always got to prioritise your efforts.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's something we see kind of consistently, kind of working with customers, you know, and certainly like, you know, we talk about observability being a journey, right? Like, you know, you start off small. Obviously, you know, people say, well, what's the, you know, the first, you know, kind of telemetry signal? I'm like, well, that's, you know, customer support. That's the first signal you start with. But I think, you know, we see this journey. We see, you know, we went through it ourselves, right? Where you start with, you know, you've got small teams. They start with, you know, a lot of autonomy. They just go and do their own thing. They're responsible for their own costs. And then as you scale, you move to centralized observability. And then suddenly you now lose that kind of control and visibility. So individual teams don't know how much they're spending sometimes. And so, you know, as we kind of talk about, you know, I guess observability being a journey, you know, on the journey, I guess that, you know, yourselves have been on, you know, what are some of the kind of, I guess, significant challenges, you know, that you've encountered, and how are some of the ways that you've approached them and tried to tackle them?
I mean, I think by far one of the biggest problems you run into is always around adoption and cultural change, right? It's all very well to have an application. You can do a lot of stuff with an observability team. And look, this is a problem related to scale. Canvas at about, I think, 4,500 employees. So there's about 1,500 engineers. And we have, I don't know, call it in the order of 300 services. But that means there's a lot of teams. And, you know, the teams are not all the same. And I talk about marketing a lot these days, which is a bit of a shift from where I used to be talking. But, you know, I talk about marketing reliability because at the end of the day, one of the big things you do in marketing is marketing segmentation. And it turns out we have a bunch of big services. There's, you know, about a dozen really big services that I care deeply about when they go down. It's a big deal. And then there's a really long tail of services that if the avatar icon doesn't show up, I'm sad, but I'm not super sad. Like, you know, we can live with that. And so that segmentation is really important, and you end up with very, very different, you know, behaviours. And so getting adoption in the big teams, actually usually not too bad. They're often very sophisticated, they're very mature, they have people who know what the heck they're doing and they really care. They're actually driving the technology, they want more from us. Getting adoption in the long tail is a very different game, because in the long tail you've got people who are still very focused on, we're just trying to deliver a product, I need to develop the code. And getting that balance of how much are we driving the smaller teams to adopt our services, and how much are we, you know, letting them just adopt in their own time. There's nuance there, because at the end of the day, look, reliability without question is the most important feature of a service. If your car doesn't turn on in the morning, you hate that car, and you're never going to buy that brand again. Like, you need that car to be reliable. And services that don't work, look, they're shit. You're never going to use them again. So reliability super matters, but it turns out if you don't have any features, then it doesn't matter if it's reliable or not. Super easy to make reliable services that don't do anything. So look, there's a trade. And, you know, right-sizing reliability I talk a lot about, and I'll keep on saying that again. It's a bit of a mantra. You need to find that balance. So look, cultural adoption, I will come back to, is a really big deal. And associated with that is also around how do we find metrics that are really actually useful to senior leadership. Like, we're just saying money's a great metric, and it's pretty good, but the first product manager I talked to about giving them outages was like, we don't use money. Like, but we went to all this effort. He's like, yeah, that's not, like, it's a small factor in how we prioritise our work. We do a lot more around impact. We do a lot more about this and this. I'm like, okay, tell me more. Like, you know, let's talk that through. So, you know, meeting your audience and actually trying to find ways that drive it. And that's all about having that close connection, getting in, you know, working very closely with the teams to understand them. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant, but I promise I'll be short. Like, I worked at Google, and Google has one particular extreme of reliability engineering, which is the site reliability engineering approach, and it's all about, embed engineers in the teams, and you have people who work on photos, and you have people who work on Blogger and networking and ads and whatever else. And Canvas at the other extreme, which is basically teach a man to fish. So we have a centralized team, and we're all about providing services. And both of them have good, pros and cons. The trouble with the embedding everyone in a team is that you end up with a constant tension where the developers are like, oh, thank gosh, I can give you my pager. And we're just not pager monkeys. We actually do more than that. And the trouble with this approach is that you don't necessarily end up with the sympathy that you need to really understand the problems that you're trying to address. And the truth is, I'm trying to drive for an answer somewhere in between where we do secondments and embeddings so that my team is constantly, understanding the problems that the developers are trying to face and making sure that our tools are fit for purpose. Culture, embedding, sympathy with the customer. It turns out we're a service provider as well.
Yeah, I think at Atlassian, when I started, there was 700 people, and now we're 15,000. And so similarly, the numbers are somewhat irrelevant. We're all at a point on that journey, but facing exactly the same problems still. As when we had 300 services, we've now got about 1,500 services that we care about. The rest are, there's a ton more, but they can burn and it's okay. We do 500 million active metrics time series, 200 million DPM. And that whole way through that journey from 700 to 15,000, it's always been a little too much, the whole time. And that story really hasn't changed. The scale of Atlassian, how fast it's growing, has always been the thing to keep up with, the thing to solve. And because we've had to react to a lot of those things, you see that in our architecture, in some of our decisions to fix things mid-incident as they're burning, and then they stay fixed like that for a really long time until we can carve out some space to actually do something about it and fix it up. And the team's continuously improving those things, but they do lead to serious challenges because the company wants to do more, they want to scale more, they want to throw more metrics at us. And as I said before, just a year ago, I was on the other side of the fence. A few years before, I was running a project called Service Proxy, which is an Envoy proxy that we stuck in front of all of our services. I think there was about 3,000 at the time that we stuck it in front of, and we rolled that out very carefully. We thought, isn't this great? We're going to be able to provide standardized metrics to everybody. Let's just turn it on and see what people use. And Colby, the head of observability at the time, was like, no, what are you doing? It's like, it'll be fine. It's like, we'll just turn it off later. And so we switched it on, and then I got reorged out and forgot all about it. And a couple of months ago, I found out they just were doing a project to turn all those off. It's fantastic. So, the scale side of things, I think, leads to a lot of other problems. And depending what your model looks like, ours is very similar to that, the Canva model that you described, along with standardization issues and a whole bunch of other things like that. It just results in us constantly sort of in this reactive space. So I guess, getting in front of that, anticipating that you're always going to have scale problems, these aren't going to go away, and making decisions with the long term in mind is really important. But of course, as you go through that journey, you change leadership, you change decision makers, and so the marketing aspect, not just out but up as well, it becomes really important to try and get people aligned. Hey, this is what we're trying to do, this is how we're going to dig ourselves out of the hole, so to speak. But yeah, for what it's worth, I still drive a car that breaks down regularly.
And do you hate it?
Many Fords later, I'm still in a Ford.
There you go.
Yeah, okay, let's move on for that. So you mentioned, the importance of, I guess, that internal alignment, right, and getting people on board, and, that, I guess, relates to, culture and driving, that organisational change. So what are, I guess, some of the ways, that you can drive, those changes, especially when you're introducing new tools. People, it's natural, right? Humans are averse to change, right? So how do you go about, driving that change, getting people to adopt new tools, new technologies, and have that be successful, right? It's obviously this traditional, carrot versus stick, right? So, what are your thoughts there, and how does that work in your organisations?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. When I started at Atlassian, the most common thing to hear was, "Don't tell me what to do." Over the course of the last 10 years, though, the realisation of platform tax when you're running non-standardised and all the things you have to do because the platform's not looking after you, I think sort of started to change things a little bit, and teams are realising, like, we've got this insurmountable set of requests of all the things that we have to do just to be compliant and secure and reliable. Like, can't the platform do it? Yeah, if you did these things, we could. And I'm like, oh, great, please tell me what to do. And so it's, it's a spectrum. We're not all the way of everybody wanting to be told what to do all the time, but there's a lot more openness to it. But if I was to go back right to the start, where we had leadership talking on stage about radical autonomy and everybody should just do whatever they want and be the change you seek looks like just doing whatever you like, I'd probably try and roll out a metric around, like, the cost to retrofit a standard. As we talk about what we could be doing together, what's the cost to retrofit that? Today it's 0. Let's keep track of that, and as it goes up, we'll get an idea of the trajectory of how hard this is going to be to fix in the future. We didn't do that, and so now there's some things that we're able to standardise as a platform. We've rolled out sidecars on many of our services, which is arguably costly, but also puts us in control of a lot of things. We've had James Moses here. He's instrumented our Java tech stack, for example, with OTLP, so people get that out of the box now. We don't have to worry about them introducing their own weird and wonderful ways of doing things. And so I think as a platform, trying to do things for the rest of the company rather than do things to them, it tends to help both in terms of gaining reputation and in standardising without sort of clamping down on innovation. We want teams to be able to do new things. We don't want to get in their way, but we don't want too much internal competition such that, like, we can't get a standardised view of across services what's going on when incidents are affecting, a massive service stack.
Yeah, look, I all of that, everything you just said, I totally agree with, and in particular, I love the idea of a metric of like retrofitting to standardisation. I think it'd be really hard to do, but it'd be amazing if you had it, because you can just see that going up and up and up. I think it's really hard to understand that when you start developing. I think a lot of people come to development, they're like, oh, how hard can this be? I just put a LAMP stack in, I'll have the code written by this afternoon, I'll roll it out. It's like, that's cute. That's really, really cute. Now let's actually talk about real services, because as you grow and you become more complex, and particularly as you move into the enterprise space, you start doing things like, well, we need to have be able to actually demonstrate that we've deleted data, and we need to have accounting standards that we meet, and it becomes hard. It's just genuinely complex. The code is not simple anymore. Slightly off track, but it amuses me. There's a great story about how I was listening to, apparently, the accounting protocols and if you're trying to sell product in the US, it's so complex that there are billion-dollar organizations, like billions of dollars. Their approach to doing this is basically just sell the product everywhere, and then when someone comes and finds them, like, work out whether you want to retrofit your accounting system, your sales system to work with it. It's not actually worth trying to, like, get it right the first time. And this is the nature of enterprise. Enterprise works in a very, very, very complex space, and so it's really easy to naively walk in and think it's easy, and then later on you're like, no, this isn't easy, and this is where the platforms, standards, frameworks, this is all the stuff that matters. Look, at the end of the day, I think I've kind of, my key points still come back to, we need to make sure that We're going to the customer, our internal customers, we're making their life easy, and we need to make it so that there's well-paved paths to make stuff work. And look, I've seen this at scale at Google, and at Google there's an amazing amount of standardization. Like, everyone does stuff very, very consistently, and our constant complaint was people were doing consistent. Like, that last 1%, there's always the last 1% where you're fighting to get like, could everyone just do it this way, please? Because you're always pushing the next frontier. So despite the fact that people were using consistent frameworks and consistent deployment standards and consistent CI/CD pipelines, we were still being like, but could you please do it this way? So it never stops. You're always pushing the next level of consistency. But at the end of the day, you've just got to make sure that you're genuinely adding value and you're selling that value and making it clear how you're selling it, why that's valuable. So a bit of a ramble, sorry, but look, there's no straightforward answers.
That is true. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's something we've kind of discovered ourselves as we've evolved, right? This need to move to more standardization. I mean, we're really excited. Obviously, the work that we've been doing to take what we're doing. We have a very good culture internally around like dog fooding, so we get people to use our software first, which helps. But definitely resonates with me of like it's very difficult to tell engineers what to do. We have a great conversation with our sales team, CRO Dave, who would always be like, I don't understand, why can't you just give them money? It's like, well, that's not how they work. They're not motivated like salespeople, Dave. They want to do interesting work. They want to be exciting work. And so it's always a great revelation of it's not just that simple. You have to kind of make them want to, right? Want to change, right? Which is always the big challenge.
Yeah, I think like you said, like the marketing piece is really important with engineers. What we find is engineers, they want to solve problems, and if we take the time to go and talk to them about the problems we're facing, sometimes we'll find that they'll want to come on board and solve it with us. Not always. We have some that are like, too bad, I'm solving it this way, and you pick your battles, but there's certainly like that aspect of engineers really wanting to jump on and solve things together, and I think when they can see the benefit to the company, that makes a huge difference. But yeah,
totally agree. Actually, one point I didn't make but did come to me is there's a cultural change I want to engineer at Canva, which is to reflect something that was true at Google, which is a level of comfort with change. A lot of developers are like, they get a little bit set in their ways and they're like, I know how to do this, and I totally get that. Like, they're very efficient, they're very fast, they can make shit happen, and when you move their cheese, they're a little bit like, come on, man, you've just broken my part of the process. I was very, very fast, and now you've broken it. One of the things I found at Google is Google engineers are insanely comfortable with change. We made a change of our core, back at Google, we changed from GFS to CFS, so from the Google file system to the Colossus file system, which is our, data center wide storage layer. We did it in 12 months. And that was an undisclosable number of exabytes of data and an undisclosable number of tens to hundreds of thousands of projects across 100,000 engineers at the time, I think. Like, these are insane numbers, and we did it in 12 months. And look, there were some complaints about it, but less than you'd expect. Like, largely people were like, it's Tuesday. It's what you do. And that's, I think, one of the key features you do need to build into your culture. You need to get people to the point where it's like, I am not defined by the fact that I'm a Java engineer or a front-end engineer. I'm defined by the fact that I'm an engineer. And you can move my cheese, and I'll just be like, hey, that is a better place for that cheese. Good point. And that's a really big cultural change I need to drive at Canva.
That's great. So I think that's all the structured questions we have now. So now we'd like to open it up to the audience. So if there's anybody that has a question, raise your hand. We'll bring a mic over to you, and you can ask the panel.
Thank you for asking questions. It's always awkward to sit here in silence.
I guess I should stand as well. The question I have is for yourself. From Atlassian's standpoint, you talked about scaling collection of metrics. It's just been a never-ending journey. There's never been a point you felt like you could handle the load. If you were to look back, what changes would you do to try and get yourself in a theoretically better position?
Yeah, okay. So I think some of what I talked about around the standards is probably a part of that, right? So I guess if you look back across the journey, you see waves of us observability getting connected with the rest of the organisation understanding what we're trying to achieve and trying to get there, and then we acquire some massive company and they come in with a whole new set of vendors, and that's the big focus. And then we decide we wanted to change the way our cloud system works, so that's the big focus. And so there's these like pockets in between where we're not doing transformative change, we're just, standard evolution, that I think if we could have utilised those better to take Atlassian on the journey and really connect with, leaders around each of the pockets, each of the departments around Atlassian, and get them on board with, hey, this is where we need to go, and this is what the standard looks like, this is what we want to achieve, this is the value for you, all of that good stuff. We'd probably be in a slightly different place now, but I think that also has to be codified in the tooling, codified in our PaaS, and that's part of the journey right now, is like trying to get those things into standards that are, agreed, for want of a better word, aligned, top down. When you've got our previous leadership that wanted that radical autonomy, that was very hard. You can't drive this sort of cultural change bottom up without some sort of alignment. And so now we're in a place where we have the opportunity to do that. So I'm not sure how well that answers your question, but look for the opportunities to be able to drive mindshare and alignment and take them as often as you can.
All right, any other questions? There was a few hands popping up.
I feel like I've heard a lot today about
Thank you, Bud.
the issues that come at scale, and the feeling I'm getting is that observability is not just something to help us, debug and code better. It becomes about integrity and accountability, and that can even lead up to the teams that we don't work with, like product, for example. Whereas if you build it in at the start, like a nervous system, it gives you a tactile sense of what's working and not working in your business, and then allows you to hold the people accountable and see, which teams you want to scale up or even scale down in that matter. How do you guys feel about that, or can you comment?
So, as I just mentioned, we acquire businesses pretty regularly, and they come in with their own stack. It's really interesting to see what companies have done when they've started later in the journey with, better technology available to them through vendors and things like that. And I think one of our recent ones is using a vendor that we used to use, but the way they're using it it's awesome for their size and scale. Fantastic. We can't roll that out to the rest of Atlassian because it would be cost prohibitive. But I think when you're at a smaller point in your scale, you have the ability to sort of set up for a longer term future with a different, foundation, right? You don't have the same legacy that a company that's been building products for 25 years does. And so, again, looking for the opportunities that are unique to your situation in your company, and understanding your own scale trajectory, you have to make the decisions that are best for you at your particular time. I don't think copying Atlassian or copying Canvas ever going to be the right thing to do, because we're so far down that journey, unless you're having exactly the same set of problems, in which case, cool, let's work together, let's talk about it and solve those things together.
Yeah, I think it's one of the interesting things about the enterprise space, which is that a lot of what we're talking about is like an external cost to the product. So minimising that cost is how we do well. If we could make observability $0, that would be great. Thank you very much. We're not really a profit centre. Although, having said that, I've had plenty of reliability engineers save the company millions of dollars because they've basically gone, did you know this costs money? And people have been like, does it? And you're like, yeah, we should save $1 million a month by tuning that. And they did. So we could be a profit centre. I think actually we did make money last year.
Usually we put those problems there to begin with, though, right?
Well, my team didn't. But I totally agree. Look, the journey is really, really different depending on where you are and exact details of your company. it's really hard to come up with generalized lessons. I think probably the biggest generalized lesson I have is get people comfortable with change, because change is going to be necessary. But you know what? Like, if you're a company, if you're a bank, then scaling isn't your issue. You're not scaling quickly. Your problem is basically what is the right level of instrumentation. And if you're a company that has to run a whole bunch of third-party software, well, that's a different set of challenges yet again. Like, one of the places I think that enterprise has not done a great job yet is sharing things like, and I've mentioned this to Grafana, which is like SaaS dashboards. Like, this is a super common problem that everyone comes across. At some point, you're like, hey, we'll get SaaS. That'll be great. We'll externalize all our problems. They'll just solve it. And at some point, you're like, we still need to monitor them. We actually still need to understand if they're delivering the service, and we still need to do all these sorts of things. So, I want a SaaS dashboard. I don't need to solve that, right? Like, this can be solved by the community, and I'm very keen to, contribute a bunch back. We've got a big Grafana rollout that we're in the middle of, and there's a bunch of stuff where I'm like, let's ship that out to the rest of the community, because we'll get refinements and improvements back. And this is the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. It lowers everyone's costs. It's a net win for everyone. So, yeah.
And at a time when it's crucial when you're scaling, there's this obsession with building out new features, and it can also help with making decisions around which one of those you want to chase and not chase.
Yeah, that's a great point, and Tom is going to be back here later today talking about kind of SLOs and why those are so important, right, to help you balance that. Where is it important for you to invest your time? Is it building new features, or is it focusing on reliability and some of the approaches that we have for how you just better make that decision? Yeah, so stay tuned for later. Yeah. All right. Yep.
It's a very similar question, actually, but could you characterise for us, particularly, Andrew, with radical autonomy, you're bringing a large number of teams on, or wanting to bring them on. Where's the biggest momentum or resistance, and where are the things that you've found that just dreadfully easy? Like, there's obviously two camps.
There's probably more than two, but there's certainly an easier way to get things done, and there's a hard way. So we've got about 600 engineering teams at the moment, and the problem with that is if we do anything that's asking them to do something, we've worked out that's about $1 million a day for one engineer to do something in every team, plus or minus a bit, but $1 million a day for any sort of request we make where they have to do things. So that's generally the hard way, because not only is it that $1 million a day, it's also trying to convince them that that's the most important thing to do. We were just talking about features versus reliability. We had Mike Cannon-Brooks tell us many years ago that we're an and company. We do that and that. It's not this or that. And so, that bubbles down to like, we do the feature and we do the reliability and we do the security and the compliance and the cost, and we might do some dev prod as well. And so every team is sort of under this radical autonomy is dealing with this prioritization problem where everything's urgent, everything's priority zero, and then I come along and say, hey, could I have some more? It just doesn't work. So wherever we can, we push things into the platform, we push things into the sidecar. Recently, we've partnered with support to help them reduce their work hours logged, talking about another metric of interest that we hadn't sort of played in that game before, that we found really interesting. To solve their problem, we rolled out traces, which we've tried to many times in the past and failed to get sort of standardization of tracing instrumentation. But what we did different this time is we went and instrumented a ton of services on behalf of the products in the key SLA experience journeys that the customer support teams were complaining about, and tried to sort of kill two birds with one stone. On one sense, we were looking after reliability for the most key experiences, and on the other, we're helping support with the things that kill them the most in terms of their investigation time. Sometimes they were spending a whole week just trying to dig in to find an issue. We find, Jira's got something like 2,000 spans in one issue view trace, and so you can imagine jumping through logs manually trying to find that. It's just soul destroying. And so we've got these opportunities that come up where we can hit multiple aspects with one go without the teams having to do a lot of work, and they're stoked at the end of the day, we're stoked, and we haven't told anyone what to do. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got a standards and practices program that's rolling out now that is sort of top-down sponsored, and I guess that would be the other side of it is if you need to make a change that's painful, it's going to be unpopular, make sure you've got top-down sponsorship and it's known, it sits in the priority stack somewhere, and it's not just another priority zero, but it's something that everybody understands and they've got enough runway to roll it out.
All right. I think we're out of time there, so I'd like to thank both Jenna and Andrew coming up and sharing your thoughts and insights with us. It's been great, so we can just get a quick round of applause for them, and thank you guys very much.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so we're going to take a quick 30-minute break now. So we've got some snacks and beverages outside behind the doors, and we'll be back at restart sessions at 12:15, so half an hour. So make sure grab a drink, grab a snack. We also have the demo booths and RC Expert booths that are outside. So I think there's one over in that corner. There's some down the end here. So come in and talk to us if you've got any more questions about certainly what we've been doing at Grafana. We'd love to hear what you've been thinking, and also love to show you what we've been working on. So we'll see you back here at 12:15.
Thanks for having us.
I'm through the same thing that you've been doing.